The following program contains scenes that some viewers may find disturbing.
She loved Halloween. Halloween was the big thing. I lit every single candle in the house. I just thought Renee might like it. Around 7 o'clock at night, I started to sob uncontrollably. I said, something's wrong. Something's not right. Do you know at the very minute that I was lighting the candles, she was being killed? She was being murdered at the same time. You can't live not knowing who created such an atrocity. And I said, look, I am a mother, and you are going to solve this crime.
Renee had a routine for coming and going to work. Often in the morning, she'd come in with a coworker. He stopped by her apartment and could not get an answer from her. That was abnormal.
29-year-old Renee Rondó is a case manager with an executive relocation company, and she's among her firm's most reliable employees.
I'll never forget that day at the office. A meeting was scheduled at 10 o'clock for Renee, myself, and her friend Yolanda. And when I got in around 9:15, 9:30, Yolanda said, Polly, Renee's not in yet. And for me, just instinctively, my stomach just turned, and I felt great anxiety, and I felt it at a physical level. 10 o'clock came, no Renee. That was not like her. She was very dependable. Yolanda kept leaving messages at Renee's home. Renee, it's Yolanda. We're really worried about you. Please call us. She called the person that Renee had been seeing, Mark.
Hi, yeah, Mark, it's Yolanda. Have you seen Renee?
No, I haven't, no.
I got a call asking, have you seen Renee? Have you talked to Renee? Because she didn't show up today at work. And I said, no. I felt a little concerned, like this is strange. Normally she would call her work and say, I'm sick or I can't make it. She's extremely reliable. I thought, oh, there's got to be some explanation. There's like she couldn't make it or something came up. Like, oh, nothing's wrong.
Then around noon, Yolanda called the superintendent of the building and asked him, would he please go into the apartment, that she was very concerned.
Hello? What the super walks into is a horrific scene. Renee Rondó was a rare and special woman.
She'd studied at the Sorbonne, and she'd taught English in Japan, and she had been an honor roll student at USC. Somebody with promise, somebody clearly who had potential.
Renee was someone that was as beautiful on the inside as she was on the outside, and she was very concerned for people, always seemed to believe the best of people.
She was mysterious and interesting, like caring, thoughtful, considerate, open-minded.
Now Renee lies murdered on her bathroom floor. And it's up to homicide detectives Terry O'Connor and Rick Zuley to figure out who's responsible. In 1994, Chicago is getting more than its fair share of murders. Nearly 1,000 a year. But in this part of town, it's rare.
Those kinds of crimes don't typically happen in a neighborhood like Lakeview.
Lakeview would be considered a very nice neighborhood. A lot of young people, 20-somethings, 30-somethings. A lot of fun, a lot of restaurants and nightlife and different things to do.
I'm sorry, I'm going to check out the entry anyway, because as you can see, they left the keys, so... Okay, I'll join you in a minute.
My God, this is a violent scene. Yeah.
She'd been strangled. The official determination of cause of death is done by the medical examiner, but you see a victim with a belt around their neck. It doesn't take Sherlock Holmes to figure that one out.
Detective Zuley looks for the telltale signs of sexual assault.
She wasn't molested at all. Was there a beating that might suggest an emotional involvement? You look for what kind of beating, what kind of struggle, or was this just business? There's nothing that would indicate a crime of passion. No, this was colder than that.
Zuley makes his way to the living room in search of more clues.
I sat down and just looked and kind of got a feel for the crime scene. Almost absorb it. After handling literally hundreds of the scenes, you get a feel for what you might be looking for. It appeared that the apartment had been searched. Signs of ransacking would indicate that somebody was in there to rob.
If he can figure out what they took, he might be able to determine a motive for the crime.
Are they a professional burglary crew? Then they're going to take the stereos and the TVs and the other things. Are they just opportunists that are looking for enough money to make their next score?
The most telling clue turns out to be at the front door. There's still a key in the lock.
If that door's been kicked in, we're talking about a home invasion. If the door isn't, well, it tells you that she opened the door or somebody opened the door with a key.
The door is last opened from the outside, either by Renee herself or by a killer with a key. Is that person her boyfriend, Mark Moore? He's first on the list of suspects, and police want to know all about the current state of their relationship.
I was pretty panicky, just not knowing what was happening.
Mark tells detectives he moved out a month or so earlier, but still has his key to the apartment.
I'm an initial suspect, but I didn't feel threatened at all in terms of the questioning. I just felt like it was good that they were questioning. I wanted them to question, because I hopefully were questioning everything. And then for me, it was like just continually trying to think about who could do this.
Mark claims the split with Renee was only temporary. He was hoping they could work out their issues.
We were still seeing each other. We decided to meet, and it was extremely pleasant. But I felt very hopeful about us. It was a good experience the last time we met. We were both very much in love with each other. We could have still had our lives together.
Mark lays out an alibi, saying he was with a friend.
Stand up.
Detectives check him for signs of violence.
Then they also kind of checked my body to see if there's any scratch marks and, to see if somehow I was involved in some kind of altercation.
Without a scratch on him, he seems to be telling the truth.
Okay, that's fine. Sit down.
Just to be sure, investigators ask Mark to volunteer for a polygraph exam.
When they gave me a lie detector test, they recognized that there was no connection there.
He was eliminated just through the course of investigation and establishing alibi.
As soon as Mark arrives home, he calls Renee's parents, Elaine and Gordon, to see how they're coping.
The phone rang and it was Mark. I said, Mark, I've been thinking about you and Renee all day long. He said, you have? I said, yeah, how are you guys?
I knew when they answered the phone that they didn't know, just by their voice immediately. I thought maybe the people at Renee's work had contacted them, or even the police had contacted them.
Don't you know?
And he said, don't you know? And I said, don't I know what? He said, didn't the police call? I said, what police?
No, what?
And he goes, Renee's dead. And I said, what? What do you mean she's dead?
It was just so painful. It was just to express that to them. Pain.
It was horror, and I started to scream.
And I heard her scream, and by the time I got to her, the only thing she could say was, Renee's dead. Those are two words that no parent ever wants to hear, So, we both went absolutely to pieces. Oh, it was brutal, just awful. Then you got to spend the rest of the time alone with your thoughts.
Elaine can't shake the last conversation she had with her daughter.
It was uncanny before she died that she called and wanted all her Halloween pictures. She loved Halloween. She was always excited. Every single year we would take some of my old gowns and dress up Renee, and she always wanted to be a princess. She said, I wanted to celebrate Halloween. And that's why she wanted her pictures.
Their youngest daughter, the love of their lives, is gone forever. Transformed by grief, the Rondos devote themselves to a nearly impossible task: find their daughter's killer. Chicago, Illinois is America's third largest city, an architectural marvel, a cultural hotspot, and a major financial center. The Windy City also has a dark side.
You can live and work in this gray city and never really notice that it's only half of the story, that Chicago is also one of the most dangerous cities in the world.
It was a safe city if you were careful and stayed in the right areas. If you strayed from the right areas, you probably were wearing a victim's name tag on your back.
The numbers are absolutely horrifying. Renee Rondo is just one of more than 930 people murdered in Chicago in 1994. With boyfriend Mark Moore in the clear, detectives call in Renee's co-workers to see if they can point to a suspect.
I drove us down to the Belmont police station. We sat in kind of an open area, and it was just so surreal. It just felt so empty and cold, and we had to wait, and they wouldn't tell us anything. That made it very difficult. Renee's death affected us all. It was something that we just couldn't even begin to fathom.
Polly explains she might be one of the last of her friends to see Renee alive.
The day Renee was killed, late afternoon, Chicago received torrential downpour. So I asked Renee and another friend of hers if they'd like a ride. And I dropped Renee at this health club. And she got out of the car. She had a book bag, a gym bag, and her purse. Waved us a cheery goodbye and said, I'll see you tomorrow.
Did Polly see or know the person who killed Renee?
I'm afraid I wasn't very helpful because everybody I knew loved her. And I just couldn't think of anybody who would have wanted to hurt her. It just was so far from anything I could conceive of.
Renee had an extraordinary upbringing. Born in Nigeria while parents Elaine and Gordon are working in the Peace Corps, she shares their adventurous spirit.
Renee loved life. People were people, you know, and friends were to be friends. It didn't make any difference what color they were or what background they had. She wanted to explore, see the world. Came back to Chicago, and that's where the story discontinues, unfortunately.
Renee's grief-stricken parents fly to Chicago from their home in Marietta, Georgia. It's the most difficult journey of their lives.
It's hard to explain, you know, what you go through. You know, you're in a state of paralysis. You can't think, you can't sleep, you can't rationalize anything. I kept thinking, maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they misidentified her. I thought that way all through the flight and the trip to Chicago.
It's the desperate hope of a shattered father. Even hardened Chicago homicide investigators are moved by Renee's murder.
Everybody that worked on the case became involved because they identified with her. And the world was a better place for her being in it, and it was missing something with her gone.
Detectives are desperate for just a shred of a clue to work with.
You talk to everybody, looking for that tiny little piece that might help.
They can't find a single person who didn't adore Renee.
When's that gonna happen?
She was one of the good guys, and we didn't find anybody that wanted to remove her.
Withdrawal at 11:45.
They pour through her financial records.
We need to know as much as we can about the victim's life. Where did she bank? Where did she, what credit cards did she have?
Her bank card is missing from her purse. If the killer took it for some quick cash, why strangle her?
Considering how far that is.
To use it, obviously, you need a PIN code. When somebody says, tell me that PIN code or I will kill you, most people will give up the PIN code in their obvious attempt to stay alive, which is the right thing to do. You can always cancel a bank, but you can't get your life back.
Fortunately, using a bank card leaves a trail.
The first thing you look at, obviously, is the last transaction. When was it and where was it? So in this case, we find a transaction that happens the night of her death and in a location that is absolutely alien to where she would be normally patronizing.
They went to a cash station machine somewhere on the south side, and they used her card. They took out $300.
Goes to there. Yeah.
So now we need to find out who used it.
The mystery of what happened to Renee takes detectives to one of America's most dangerous neighborhoods. A neighborhood police are surprised to find Renee knew well. In her spare time, Renee volunteered in the housing projects of Chicago's South Side. She was helping young people to escape the slums by encouraging them to finish high school and go to college.
She went to work for Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition, which was focused largely on poor inner-city communities.
She was a leader. She was always very independent and always wanting to do things. Renee was always speaking out. She wanted to save the whole world.
This was a part of who Renee was, is to reach out, you know, to extend herself to other people who were in need.
Did her willingness to go to a dangerous place cost Renee her life? Police hope to get the answer from the bank's security tape.
There was actually a video at the bank, but the video wasn't working, so they couldn't identify who was using the card.
Their big break has gone bust.
There were no suspects. It was a chilling mystery.
And just as their best lead comes to a dead end, the pressure to solve the case erupts. Renee Rondo is strangled to death on Halloween, her favorite night of the year. Still reeling in shock, her parents, Gordon and Elaine, make the painful trip to Chicago, where they head straight for the morgue.
We got to the morgue to identify her, and they wouldn't let us see her. They took us into a little room, and all I could do was, with Gordon, look at a TV screen, and there was Renee lying on a slab. And I said, I can't identify somebody in a TV screen, and they wouldn't let me in, and I begged and pleaded and cried. I was semi-hysterical. Well, somebody finally convinced somebody else higher up that we have to get in because this lady is not going to leave until she sees her daughter. I know a lot of people don't want to see their children after they die, but I had to see that girl. I had to see that beautiful girl. So I went in and they pulled her out on the gurney. All I could see was Renee laying on that gurney with a toe tag on her right foot with a blanket over her, and she was as beautiful as she was when she was alive. But what a way to see your daughter with a toe tag. Toe tag. It was, and they wouldn't let me touch her. They kept saying germs, germs, and I said, germs? Germs? I want to hug my daughter. They wouldn't let me. They were holding me back.
You go to the morgue and it all kind of comes home, crashing home. So it's just a devastating experience.
The Rondo's next stop is no less devastating.
I still remember going to that apartment, cleaning it out, and crawling around in my hand.
Gordon and Elaine Rondo have devoted themselves to getting Chicago's homicide unit to pay more attention to the murder of their beloved 29-year-old daughter, Renee. Those efforts are starting to pay off.
Withdrawal there. Yeah.
Police know that someone used Renee's ATM card just hours after her murder. They subpoena all the records for that machine on that night and get a huge break.
2 minutes after Renee's card was used, somebody else stepped up to that machine and used it as well.
We were able to ascertain what time the transaction took place, and from there, through a lot of work by a lot of folks, identified somebody who had been out there at the same time, which gave us enough to go out and find him and see what he saw.
The police were able to determine that the person who used the card 2 minutes later was a guy named Richard Claiborne. Richard Claiborne told the police that he was not the only person at the ATM machine that night, that there was somebody ahead of him, somebody who had driven up in a car.
The gentleman who was there when they used Renee's gas station card, he said it was raining out that night, so he had stepped in underneath some kind of cover over the gas station machine, and he actually got a pretty good look at the man.
Claiborne's description helps create a sketch of the man he saw using Renee's card. It could trigger some memories. Just to be sure, the Rondos offer a reward. His picture goes up on posters all over Chicago's South Side.
A lot of Renee's friends stepped up big and helped out. They posted them all over the place.
The police had a pretty good network to circulate the reward poster. And I was impressed with that, actually. So that certainly gave us hope.
Someone must know who he is. It takes a month before the allure of $10,000 brings in a promising lead.
was a response to the reward that was posted. An individual came forward as an informant.
Petty criminal Eugene Hawes claims to have information about the case.
So as I was saying, you know, I was over at...
But he seems most interested in getting his hands on the reward money.
One of the things they talked about was don't offer too much money, right? Because, you know, you offer $100,000, you know, you're going to have every screwball in the city of Chicago, right, saying, hey, I want a piece of the action. So they're going to make up stories. So what you're going to do is you're going to distract the police, right? They're worried about leads that they consider legitimate. And now all of a sudden you're getting dozens and hundreds of phone calls with phony leads.
The one thing about rewards is you may get the person that knows it, but you're also going to get a lot of nutcases that want to try to cash in on the money.
Eugene Hawes had a colorful background, and yes, he was known to the police. He had information. Now, the question was, is it real? Is it valid?
He's not somebody that you would necessarily take at his word. It's an old expression prosecutors use, that if you wanted to convict the devil, you'd have to go to the deepest, darkest depths of hell to get witnesses.
After more talk about the reward, Hawes finally fingers someone he knows well, Andre Griggs.
He claimed he had overheard Andre Griggs bragging about the crime.
He was talking about the Halloween caper he pulled off.
Hawes has more. He says Griggs boasted his girlfriend Benita Johnson helped him pull off the crime.
You take it with a grain of salt and see if it opens the door for you to move forward.
So who are Andre Griggs and Benita Johnson? And what's their connection to Renee Rondo?
Well, they're in the system. Both had criminal records. Andre Griggs was a drug user and a petty criminal, burglar, street guy.
In short, he doesn't fit the profile of a cold-blooded killer. But right now, he's the only lead the cops have.
And face forward.
Is Griggs the man Rick Claiborne saw at the bank machine when Renee's card was being used? Claiborne picks him out.
Take 2 steps forward. And face to your right.
That puts Griggs at the ATM.
And face to your left.
That's good, but you need something that you can hold in your hand that says this is all valid, it's all true.
Investigators turn their attention to Griggs' suspected accomplice, Benita Johnson.
We got a search warrant and went out there and were very pleased to find many of the things that were taken out of the apartment. A gym bag, a sweater, and some jewelry, and this was the evidence that you could hold in your hand.
They found a sweater that obviously would not fit the female defendant. And one of the family members or friends was able to identify that sweater.
It's almost enough to put the pair away. But they could argue they found the stuff on the street. The cops need a confession.
Obviously, then the next step is we got to talk to him. So they're separated and interviewed. You treat him as if he's your new best friend and get him to open up and talk. And people generally will. If you give them the opportunity, they'll talk to you and tell you what they did. It starts out small, and then you get bigger and bigger pieces of the puzzle until pretty much you have the whole puzzle.
6 months after Renee Rondo's young life was taken, the heartbreaking truth is revealed. Benita Johnson and Andre Griggs both tell the same awful story.
Drug users. They're looking for something for their next fix.
Renee worked so hard to make it a better world. These were 2 people that she would have helped to save.
As their trial opens in May 1995, Griggs and Johnson go back on their confessions.
If they don't recant the statement, they have no defense. And in this case, no defense means you're going away. So they took the chance. They rolled the dice to see maybe we might win this.
There's a lot of cases where there's confessions given, and then when it comes time to actually take the responsibility, people still go to trial because we were seeking the death penalty on both defendants.
Delays by the defense stretch out proceedings for almost 2 years.
We'd go into that courtroom. We had to endure almost 2 years just to get to trial. Going back and forth to Chicago monthly for status hearings. And the judge would ask the defense, are you ready to go to trial? And he'd say, no, I need another 30 days. And so we'd continue 30 days later. We were concerned about evidence disappearing, right? We were concerned about witnesses going away or being killed.
During this lengthy ordeal, the Rondos learn exactly what happened that terrible Halloween night.
I'm telling you, if there's anything worse than getting a phone call in the middle of the night with the news that your daughter's been murdered, the only thing worse than that is having to listen to the details, right? The awful details of how she died.
Renee Rondo believed she was safe in her own neighborhood. Her family now learns she paid for that trust with her life.
She was oriented towards getting out and exploring the world. And it's hard when you come back to an environment where you're supposed to be careful and you're supposed to look over your shoulder and you're supposed to lock your doors at night and confine yourself. That wasn't Renee's personality.
She was out on Halloween night when Andre Griggs and his girlfriend, Benita Johnson, stalked, robbed, and strangled her for nothing more than a few bucks.
He said they were looking for drug money. And they just picked a hunting ground where they felt reasonably safe in being able to commit the crime.
It was a very cold, windy, rain-swept night in Chicago.
Definitely get this.
There weren't so many people on the street, so a single woman was probably more obvious than she would have been otherwise.
And they saw her. This was a beautiful, innocent young woman. She was weaker than they were. She was a lone woman walking down the street. She was the game and they were the predators.
She was followed to her doorstep and didn't get inside. She was accosted there.
They grabbed her as she was going in, hand over her mouth, keep her from screaming.
Andre had a .357 Magnum with him.
They rushed her inside. The robbery started.
Griggs snatched a gold chain from around her neck, grabbed her purse, dumped that out, looking for whatever he could grab.
It was like $30. Got her gas station card. She gave him the PIN number. And, you know, the whole time she was pretty much telling them to take whatever they want, just don't hurt her.
Griggs ransacked the apartment looking for other things to take, while Johnson held her at bay with a gun.
She took the opportunity there to try to break free. And Benita screams for help, and Griggs rushes back in there, and this is where he grabs her and starts strangling her. They choke her until she passes out. chose to go the step further. And ultimately, at the end, there was a belt put around her neck and she was choked.
I didn't really want to hear the details, but at the same time, it really allowed me to have a picture of what was happening and what she went through. And the horror of it, I believe she really did suffer. Maybe if I would have been there, could have protected her, it would have never happened.
Renee was one of those people that you wished your daughter would grow up to become. I think society has cheated. You can't bring her back. But maybe she rests a little better if you get the offender off the street. Hopefully.
Finally, in January 1997, 22 months after the trial opened, Griggs and Johnson are both found guilty of first-degree murder. Andre Griggs is sentenced to life without parole. Benita Johnson is sentenced to 60 years in prison with the possibility of parole.
The verdict of, life without parole, I was very, very happy about that, because I knew that we wouldn't ever have to worry about that person again, that male again.
He may have been the one that actually strangled Renee, but she was right there all the way through with him and, in fact, encouraging it. And she had also struggled with Renee, held her down at one point, and she also, all the way up to the end, never, ever acknowledged any responsibility. Even at the sentencing, every defendant is given a chance to say something. And what she started talking about was how she hopes that they find the real killers. So, to the bitter end, she was not taking any responsibility for what she did. Personally, I would have given her natural life to make sure she never got out.
I remember standing with the Rondos, and we saw her going from the courtroom, being led back, as the jail is right next door. If looks could have killed, we would have all been dead. And I thought, this is, the meanest bitch I've ever seen in my life. And I don't use language like that.
The Rondos believe there's a valuable lesson to be learned from their daughter's murder. They've devoted their lives to an organization committed to reducing the risk of violent crime.
I think Renee's experience shows that. Every one of us is at risk, okay? And we need to understand that, and we need to be prepared to do something about it.
This cannot happen anymore. It's enough. I have been keeping a daily journal for 18 years, and I've written to Renee for 18 years. Renee has stood by my bedside many, many a night, giving me hope.
Renee's somebody who cared, somebody who was engaged. Was willing and able to reach out. Where reaching out was needed. She's with us. And, we know that. She's there. And she always will be.